All right, let's dive into some serious celebrity drama today, but with some equally serious numbers attached. We're talking explosive accusations, two of music's absolute biggest names, and a whole lot of zeros.
Yeah, it's really a classic tale, isn't it? Big business, superstar power, and that age-old question, who gets paid what and why?
Exactly. So today we're taking a deep dive into the very public dispute between Nicki Minaj and Rock Nation concerning title equity. This all really kicked off with her bold claims on social media just a few months back, in July 2025.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how these very public claims just rip back the curtain on the often, opaque world of celebrity contracts and these really complex corporate transactions.
Right.
We're not just looking at a dispute, we're really trying to dissect the facts, the figures, and the critical legal and financial questions this whole situation brings up.
Hmm.
And it's not just about Nicki Minaj, is it? It could potentially be a blueprint or maybe a cautionary tale for many artists navigating similar deals in this digital age.
So our mission today is basically to cut through the noise, look at the verifiable facts from our sources, and help you understand the strengths and, maybe more importantly, the limits of these claims, especially when those numbers get, well, dizzying.
And dizzying they definitely are.
Yeah. Let's jump right into the heart of it then. Nicki Minaj's specific claims. She really aired this out in a string of X posts back in July. She publicly alleged she was lowballed, that was her word, with an offer around $1 million for her stake in Tidal.
Just $1 million, wow.
Right. But she didn't stop there. She's publicly stated she believes she's owed far, far more now. She's citing figures that range from approximately $9 million all the way up to a mind-boggling 100, 200 million.
Whoa.
Yeah. And she's even framed this whole situation as a moral or karmic debt. That's quite the public call-out, wouldn't you say? It feels like she's really trying to rally public sentiment here.
Oh, absolutely. And the way public platforms like X are being leveraged now to pressure companies or individuals, it's increasingly common. Sometimes it feels like it bypasses traditional legal channels entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Which really begs the question, what's the difference between, a strong public claim, something that gets a lot of attention, and something that's actually legally enforceable?
That's the key.
Yeah. And for an artist of Nicki Minaj's stature, there's clearly a lot at stake beyond just the money, right? Our sources note that, okay, maybe to some within the music business, her accusations might seem dramatic, maybe even an exaggeration.
Sure, you hear that sometimes.
But if you actually look at the figures she's citing, especially that $9 million mark, her grievance starts to sound, well, pretty reasonable, doesn't it?
It does put it in a different light.
It taps into that fundamental desire for fairness. What an artist feels they've contributed versus what they ultimately received in the formal structure. This isn't just about money. It's about respect, recognition in an industry built on personal brand.
Which makes total sense, especially when you consider the sheer scale of the transaction we're talking about here. To really grasp the magnitude of Nicki's claims, we need to talk about the title sale itself.
Right, a backdrop.
Exactly. Your sources confirm a truly blockbuster deal, one that definitely sent ripples across the entire industry. We're talking about the reported sale of a majority stake in Tidal by JYZ to Square.
Which is now Block. Yeah.
Now Block, right. This transaction was widely reported. Valuations were floating around from approximately $297 million up to maybe $350 million.
Yeah, numbers.
Huge. Our sources really seem to dial in on that commonly referenced figure from the 2021 transactions, which is roughly $297 million to $302 million. So this is the entire financial pie, if you will, from which Nicki believes she should have received a much, much larger slice.
And that headline figure is certainly substantial. It confirms Tidal's significant value as an asset, no question. But, and this is crucial, you have to distinguish between that overall headline sale price for a majority stake, remember, and what individual minority shareholders might actually get.
Okay.
These deals are notoriously complex, and honestly, not all equity is treated equally. For instance, those headline figures often mix cash and stock valuations. And the specific terms for minority holders can vary wildly, depending on what's actually written into their individual contracts. It's not simply a matter of taking your percentage of the total and expecting that exact amount as your payout.
So given all that complexity, how do we even begin to unpick Nicki's varied financial claims? How do you get from her alleged $1 million offer to $9 million, or even that, frankly, staggering $200 million?
Yeah, let's try to crunch some numbers based on what our sources provide. They detail a pretty straightforward calculation that gets you to around that $9 million figure.
Okay.
This figure comes from what you call a naive pro rata value. for an alleged 3% stake. And pro rata, just for anyone unfamiliar, simply means a direct proportional share based on your percentage of ownership.
Right, simple math.
Simple math. So if Nicki, hypothetically, held 3% of TIDAL and the sale price was roughly $300 million, then yes, 3% of that would indeed be $9 million.
Okay, makes sense on paper.
It's a very clean calculation on paper, yes. But it hinges on two really crucial assumptions. First, that she actually owned 3% of the issued equity, meaning actual shares that have been formally created and distributed.
Not just a promise.
Exactly, not just a verbal promise or some preliminary discussion. And second, the assumption is that the deal terms paid out to all minority shareholders on a perfectly pro rata basis at that headline price, which, as I just mentioned, isn't always a given in these intricate sales. This really highlights what we sometimes call the shaky math in public claims. Headline sale figures don't always reflect what individual minority holders ultimately receive because there can be layers of different agreements.
Layers, like what specifically? What kind of things?
Well, you could have preferred shares, for instance. Those give certain investors priority in payouts, or things called convertible instruments, basically, a form of debt that can later be exchanged for shares, which can really shift the landscape for existing equity holders.
Okay, I see.
And then you just have highly customized private contracts that dictate payouts for different partners. Without those private details, things like formal assignment agreements, stock options, specific dilution clauses.
What are those again?
Dilution clauses basically allow a company to issue more shares later on, maybe to raise more money, which can potentially reduce the percentage value of earlier stakes.
Got it.
Right. So without seeing those clauses or specific buyout letters, the public math is often just, well, speculative.
And what about that staggering $200 million claim then? That's just a completely different league of numbers.
It really is. For Minaj to legitimately reach figures like $200 million purely as an equity payout, the implied percentage of ownership would have to be enormous, like somewhere between 33% to 66% of a $300 million valuation.
Oh, that seems unlikely.
It conflicts dramatically with most public accounts of TIDAL's ownership structure, right? Which typically describe JAYZ holding the majority alongside a group of other superstar co-owners, each holding a much smaller, though still significant, stake.
Right, like the 3% figure we discussed.
Exactly. So the $200 million figure appears to be more of, perhaps, an estimate of broader damages, maybe unpaid royalties she feels she's owed, or just a subjective claim of what she believes she deserves for her overall contribution and star power.
Like a negotiating tactic.
Possibly. It feels more like an opening negotiation position rather than a direct, provable, pro rata equity payout from the documented sale.
Okay, so after all this talk about big numbers and complex deals, the elephant in the room really seems to be, did Nicki Minaj actually own a documented piece of TIDAL? Or was this more of a handshake deal, maybe an understanding that never quite got formalized on paper?
Bingo.
What does the paper trail, or maybe the lack of one, tell us? Because that feels like the real core of this deep dive, doesn't it?
You've absolutely hit on the central factual gap in the public record. Investigative write-ups, which have really painstakingly dug into public corporate records and filings, have simply not found clear public evidence that Minaj held recorded equity.
Recorded equity meaning?
Meaning actual stock certificates, entries in a formal shareholder registry.
Sure.
The kind of, irrefutable proof you need when millions are on the line. Our sources indicate that some reporting suggests she may have been offered cash for an interest or maybe presented with some initial paperwork.
Okay.
But signed recorded equity isn't visible in those public registries. And this is a critical distinction because those same write-ups point out that other artists who did sign the paperwork and were on the official registries, they did receive payouts in the TIDAL transactions.
So the system worked for those who had the paperwork.
It seems so. It really highlights the difference between an offer or an intention and a finalized, legally binding agreement.
Yeah. Imagine trying to prove you own a piece of a multi-million-dollar company without any official paperwork to back it up. That really underscores the vital difference between a public assertion, however passionately delivered, and an actual legal entitlement. And it's not just Nicki Minaj raising these kinds of questions either, is it? What's fascinating here is that other major artists were also part of the TIDAL story, and their experiences offer some really valuable perspective on just how these deals can play out.
Precisely. Our sources mentioned there were about 16 artist co-owners initially. We're talking truly household names. Beyoncé, Rihanna, Kanye West, Alicia Keys, Usher, Madonna, J. Cole, Lil Wayne, T.I., among others.
A real all-star lineup?
Absolutely. Public reports indicate that these co-owners were each given approximately 3% equity when TIDAL relaunched as this artist-owned platform.
Okay, that 3% again?
That 3% again. And here's the kicker. When JYZ sold a majority stake to Square Block in 2021, those co-owners reportedly received around $8.9 million apiece.
$8.9 million, so very close to that $9 million calculation for Nicki.
Very close. This provides a concrete, real-world example of artists benefiting materially from ownership when big business moves happen. It shows the model can work if the documentation is in place.
That's a huge data point. It shows that a documented equity stake can translate into significant payouts. But not all experiences were smooth sailing, right? Our sources also bring up the example of Kanye West.
Indeed. Kanye made similar public complaints back in the day, claiming TIDAL owed him over $3 million. His dispute was actually quite multifaceted. He was cited a promised bonus for bringing in supposedly 1.5 million new subscribers with The Life of Pablo.
Ah, I remember that controversy.
Right. And unpaid fees for making exclusive content and unreimbursed video production costs. He eventually ended up leaving the ownership and contract relationship with TIDAL amidst that dispute. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, these examples show two things clearly. First, that equity can translate into significant payouts for artists, provided it's properly documented.
Right.
And second, the disputes over promised compensation or equity are unfortunately not uncommon in the music industry, especially as business models evolve at warp speed.
Seems like a recurring theme.
It really does.
Yeah.
This whole history just underlines why documentation is so critically important. This isn't just one artist's complaint. It reflects broader issues within the industry about contracts, transparency, artist compensation in the streaming era where value can sometimes feel a bit, ephemeral.
Yeah, absolutely. So if these claims were to move beyond just public statements on X and into, say, a court of law or even a serious closed-door negotiation, what would actually matter? What are the real brass tacks here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the $200 million question here. While public posts can generate immense pressure, grab headlines, sway opinion, they don't substitute for legal proof.
Okay.
The most decisive evidence would always be written agreements. We're talking official stock certificates, assigned agreements which formalize a transfer of ownership, signed shareholder registers, or even detailed emails documenting specific offers and acceptance. Courts just generally favor written, signed instruments for equity claims because they provide clear, undeniable proof of intent and agreement. Without them, it quickly devolves into a he said, she said scenario, which is incredibly difficult to win, especially when we're talking about a deal of this magnitude years after the fact.
And it's not just about having a document, right? It's about when you got it and what exactly it covers.
Absolutely. Timing and potential dilution, like we talked about, are also key.
Mm-hmm.
Many early investors or partners might accept buyouts along the way or take convertible notes, essentially loans that can later become shares, changing their ownership status. Or their stakes simply get diluted over time as a company raises more capital by issuing new shares.
Right.
So even if Minaj had a verbal promise or maybe an oral discussion about equity early on, proving that in court, especially years later, is incredibly challenging without clear written evidence. Plus, you have legal hurdles like the statute of limitations.
The deadline to sue.
Exactly, the legal deadline for bringing a claim. And that can pass surprisingly quickly if you don't take formal action. And then there's discovery. That's the legal process where you can compel the other side to hand over private records, like TIDAL's internal documents.
Which you only get if you sue.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You typically only get access to that through formal litigation. So while public claims can definitely generate pressure for settlements, maybe just due to reputational risk.
To make it go away.
Right, to make it go away.
Yeah.
They don't replace that core legal substantiation. A company might settle simply to avoid the public relations headache, even if they feel their legal footing is solid. It's a calculation of risk versus reputation.
Understanding this really shows how much of the actual proof often lives behind closed doors, in filing cabinets or servers, not just out there in public forums. So, drawing all these threads together now, after diving into your sources, what can we definitively say, and what still remains kind of ambiguous?
Well, certain aspects are indeed well supported by public evidence.
Yeah.
For instance, it's abundantly clear that TIDAL, or at least significant portions of it, was sold for hundreds of millions. That $297 million to $350 million range is widely reported.
Okay, the big sale happening.
The big sale happened, check. And it's also a public fact that Nicki Minaj has publicly claimed she was lowballed. She stated she was offered roughly $1 million for her stake, and she clearly believes she's owed tens, maybe even hundreds of millions more. Those are her public assertions, and they've certainly made an impact.
But what about the core claim, the actual ownership part, the piece that would legally entitle her to those millions she's talking about?
That's precisely where the ambiguity lies.
Yeah.
What is not established by the public evidence we have is that Minaj definitively issued recorded equity and title in a specific percentage that would entitle her to that kind of multi-million pro rata payout. Public records reporting is, at best, ambiguous or contradictory on this point, and rigorous investigations by journalists have, so far, failed to locate clear public shareholder records showing her stake.
So the paper trail goes cold.
It seems to. And what's truly fascinating here is that clear distinction. The sale numbers for title. Well documented, widely reported, that part of the story feels concrete. However, the existence and the actual size of Minaj's legal entitlement to a portion of those numbers is simply not established, at least not in the public record.
Yeah.
It highlights, once again, the crucial role of documentation. It's like having, a treasure map versus actually holding the treasure chest itself. One is a claim, the other is possession.
So we've taken a deep dive into the numbers, the claims, and that elusive paper trail surrounding Nicki Minaj's very public accusations against Roc Nation and TIDAL. It's definitely a complex picture, isn't it? Mixing celebrity, high finance, and these legal intricacies that often play out far from the public eye.
Ultimately, this isn't just a story about Nicki Minaj, though. It's really a stark reminder, I think, of the unique challenges artists face in an industry where relationships and maybe good faith sometimes seem to precede formal contracts. It almost makes you wonder if the very nature of celebrity, which thrives on public connection, ironically creates an environment where formal legal protections sometimes fall by the wayside, especially in those early, exciting stages of a new venture.
That's an interesting point.
So, while public statements are powerful, they can certainly sway opinion, our deep dive really underscores that when millions are on the line, at the end of the day, the written contract often remains the undisputed king.
That definitely raises an important question for you, our listener. In an age where so much business seems to happen digitally, maybe verbal agreements feel more common, and relationships are forged so publicly. How much does that old adage, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen, still truly hold? Especially in the face of these mega deals and superstar demands. Something to mull over until our next deep dive.